Welcome to Accounting Life with Jotham Tai, a space where we'll talk about anything and everything surrounding the people that grind through your month-end accounting close.
Hi, everyone. Today's episode is about accounting at pre-IPO companies. Our guest today is Barrett Daniels, partner at Deloitte. On this episode, we talk about what it takes to work in the pre-IPO environment. We'll discuss pre-IPO company culture, the skills you need to work in these companies, questions to ask before joining a pre-IPO company, and what's unique about the special purpose acquisition company variety. Now I'll hand it over to our host, Gapify CEO, Jotham Tai.
Hey, Barrett, it's Jotham. Great to have you on the show today.
Hi, thank you for having me. Looking forward to our discussion today.
We've got a fun chat ahead of us talking about IPOs and accounting careers in IPO companies. But before we dive in there, Barrett, if you can just quickly introduce yourself and your professional background, I think that'd be a good way to get started.
Yeah, sure. My name is Barrett Daniels. I'm a partner at Deloitte. I'm our US IPO services co-leader. Essentially what that means is I spend all of my time talking to IPO companies, helping them navigate the process from being a private company to public.
Awesome. And you are the perfect guest for this show, Barrett. And the theme that I wanted to have for this particular episode are targeting the accountants who have traditionally had manufacturing or traditional industry type careers. And now that with the pandemic and remote work being more prominent, there may be a lot of accountants out there looking to make a move to tech or pre-IPO companies, and wanted to use this episode to give them more information about how they can go about doing that.
Excellent.
So just diving right in, and I know there's definitely some kind of biases, and particularly from me as an accountant who came up in the Silicon Valley, but I would to me think about pre-IPO and newly IPO companies as more dynamic cultures and environments. From your experiences working with IPO companies, is that true, or do you have anything to add in terms of typical cultures that you encounter in these types of companies?
Yeah, for sure. Look, I would say sort of two things jump out at me, right? The first one would be, I'd say they're pretty intense. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in a very short amount of time. And they're very important pieces of the puzzle for the company. This is for companies that hadn't done an IPO before. This is the most significant event that they've ever been through. So there's typically a lot of people within the company that have never been through the process. And I often say IPOs aren't terribly hard. They're not terribly complicated. It's just that they're different. Right. And they're different than what anybody usually within the company has ever done before. So there's a big learning curve and there's a lot of challenges along the way. But then the other side of that is I would say they're fun. You get to deal with a lot of experiences that you won't get in other instances. And I often like to talk about, I tend to believe there's two kinds of people in this world, right? There's private company people and public company people, because the experiences are so very different. And it is during the IPO that you see that crossover, right? And it's not surprising you see a lot of companies lose a lot of their people once the company goes public because things change. And, one way I would often put that, and of course, this is just a generalization, but I think companies get less fun through that process, right? Because it's this sort of run fast and break things mentality, and sort of this chaos that you get in the private company compared to the public company. You have to be more mature, and you have to sort of hammer these deadlines, and you have to follow the calendar to a T, where before it was a little more squishy. And so I want to say it is intense, right? And it's hard work and all of that, but at the same time, it is super exciting. And I tend to find public companies boring, right? Like where private companies, certainly private companies navigating the IPO space are anything but that, right? There's so much going on that it can be fun. I mean, exhausting, but in a neat way.
I can add to that, Barrett, from my own personal experiences. So I've worked at pre-IPO and newly IPO'd companies before, both full-time and also just from my consulting hat. And I can see from the experiences that I've had with more mature public companies how you just don't have the power to really influence change in your organization, right? Because it's more mature, you have more rigid requirements and in some cases bureaucracies. Whereas if you work at a pre-IPO company, you're being charged with the responsibility of putting on 20 different hats and figuring things out. And I think for us accountants who enjoy that pace and also that learning experience, I think it's a great place to really flourish in your career.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I love the point about the different hats, right? Like, because, in startup world, accounting is typically neglected until it can't be anymore, right? And so because of that, you're often well behind the rest of the departments in the company as you race to catch up and to get to where the department needs to be when you do go public. And because of that, it is, this kind of craziness to where, okay, I know your job isn't to do this, but we need you to do this, today, for the next month, whatever the case is. And sometimes that's not great, but sometimes it's really cool because, you may have been a certain type of accountant your entire career, but now you're in this wonderful opportunity to actually get to try another piece of it, where you might not have had that opportunity sort of in any other scenario. So I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, well, and intense is the key word. I think a lot of the accelerated experiences, just like it was in the Big Four, right? When we started our career, yes, it's intense, but the amount of learning opportunities that you get in that short period of time is something that I think is just going to be valuable for the rest of your career, frankly. And I think about Barrett for one of the gigs that I had. So I stepped in and helped manage AP and GL. And before I knew it, several months later, international accounting, internal audit, all these other functions started, getting under my umbrella. And I think, for those that, again, want that exposure and that experience, an IPO environment is the best place for it, right?
100% agree.
Well, so speaking of, all these different experiences that you get, what kind of skills and what kind of experiences are helpful for someone looking into, getting into that accelerated environment?
Sure. And I touched on the chaos before, right? The ability to be comfortable in that chaos, I think is a key skill and something that a lot of people struggle with. I personally love it. I don't know why. I can't put my finger on, something to do with my upbringing that allows me to not only feel comfortable, but really thrive in it, right? So, and meaning and digging into that a little deeper, right? The chaos is you don't know what you're going to be doing tomorrow. You may have a deadline coming up, but somebody may come to you and say that deadline's not that important, right? We got to figure out this other thing. And being able to adjust, which would go to my next sort of view would be flexibility for all the things we just talked about in that last, for the last question, right? Is understanding that your job title may suggest that you're going to be doing one thing all day, every day, but in this environment, that could change at the drop of a hat, right? And so having this mindset of being a true team player, right? Understanding that we're all working together to get to this particular goal. And if that means I have to sort of tweak my day-to-day or dramatically change it even, I should be okay to do that. And then I would say being reliable, right? Like making sure that the rest of the team can trust that you will get done what you say you will get done. Because as the company matures and the deadlines do get less squishy and considerably more important, you're going to have a lot of people trusting in you to actually do what you say you're able to do. And there's a lot of pieces to that too, making sure you don't bite off more than you can chew, making sure you are direct with your reports, and not telling them what they want to hear, but telling them what they need to hear. Like all of these pieces, I think are super important skills for anybody that would like to work at one of these crazy places.
Agree 100%, Barrett. And you touched on just being flexible and also just being a team player, because you're going to be asked to do something that is not within your scope typically. And I know how important it is for larger enterprises and mature organizations to, just really make sure you're locked in your zone and your particular area of expertise. But in a dynamic IPO environment, you're going to get asked to do things that you're not comfortable with, and you got to be okay with that.
Yeah. I'd also add, right, if you're going to be in the accounting department, right, an understanding of audits, right, and auditors, I think is extremely helpful. And we touched on this earlier, right, like the importance of having a public accounting background. It's not critical. It's not everything, but I do think it's very helpful when you do go into the space, because the audit is always the long pole in the tent in IPOs, always, right? Or at least it has been the 20 years I've been doing this. I would bet it has been for the 400 years that these things have been going on, right? And so understanding what the auditors want, when they need it, and how to get it to them so they can do their audit as quickly as possible is such an important skill if that's going to be part of your role at the company.
I double down on that, Barrett. I think it is essential for someone to either have public accounting and audit background or have been an accountant at a publicly traded company where you know what the auditors are going to expect, right? Because the biggest difference between a company that's private, not looking to go IPO, and one that is public is, all those crazy financial reporting requirements, whether it be, international accounting or tax provision or anything along those lines. And that's really the key part that I think a lot of, pre-IPO companies are looking to add to their teams in order to go public.
That's a great point. And I hadn't thought about that as part of this, but I say public company experience is way more important than IPO experience, right? And I tell this all the time to companies I work with that are all inevitably looking for a new controller or SEC reporting person, because the IPO is just going to be, 6-9 months of that company's existence. It's the piece that's after that I think is really important to understanding what the company is going to need to be doing once the company is public, where you can easily supplement the IPO process with teams like mine, right? Like the Deloitte ARA team, but and there's several other teams around the Bay Area, country, and everywhere, right? That can come in and help you get through the IPO process. But I don't think, I've never thought that we were necessarily long-term solutions, right? It may be on occasion, but generally speaking, we're like a SWAT team, right? To come in and help you get through this really challenging experience. But you need to have the right people in place to make sure you don't fall on your face after the company is actually public. And the best people to do that are people that have been there and done that before. And to your point, have that public company experience. So I would love to have somebody with public accounting and public company experience. But again, out of those two and IPO experience, by far and away, the IPO experience is the less important of those three.
Well, and Ryan, as the non-accountant in the room here, hearing about all this work that accountants have to go through with an IPO, like what's going through your mind? I'm kind of curious.
I as this conversation is playing out, I just feel like it's such a different. I can't tell are we redefining accountant here, or is this insider knowledge? Because my perception of the accountant is that they're just in the back room, with their slide rulers. But the way we're talking about them is that they're this active, strategic part. And I'm wondering is that how everyone sees accountants, or are we kind of redefining what it means to be an accountant in this?
No, I think there is some of that, right? Like there are people that is a critical piece of the puzzle as for any company that's getting through the process. But at the same time, there is this other level that really needs to understand the flexibility and the changes that are going to be happen through the process, and need to be able to change with the company as the company matures, as it actually meets these critical stepping stones along the way. But you're always going to need both sides of that. So I don't think we're redefining it. Maybe we are just highlighting a different aspect to the industry.
Yeah. And it's such a huge part of our industry too, Barrett. And I know from the outside looking in, and we're just known for the entity that processes numbers and gets them on a piece of paper. But I think Ryan's learned throughout our different podcast episodes here that there's more to it, whether to Barrett's point, whether it's helping a company get ready for a big event like an IPO. And I think about like all the management that has to happen in between. So I also thought about adding the point as we're having this conversation. I think a lot of accountants, we find ourselves in positions where we have to hire a lot when we get into these IPO companies. So I think about like people management and recruiting, which could take up like half of your day, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So a lot of interesting things to think about there. And, Barrett, just to kind of narrow down a scenario for advice sake. So say, for instance, I'm a private company accounting manager from the Midwest. I'm fielding several offers for pre-IPO companies here in the Silicon Valley looking to beef up their team. What are some good signals to get, or what are some good interview questions to maybe ask to vet out the ones that are going to put you through crazy all-nighters versus the ones where you're going to get pretty balanced but accelerated work experience?
So, I'm trying to put this delicately, right? But like, I would make sure I ask questions to make sure that that the role has real upward mobility, right? Like oftentimes these companies are just so slammed and they just need additional people that they're just looking to hire people to fit a role without really thinking fully through what it means for that person, right? And so I sometimes worry about people getting stuck in a role that's not going to really go anywhere once the IPO is done. So I would ask questions like, how do I get your job, right? When you move on or when you get promoted, what does success look like, right? In this role in order to allow me to make sure that the opportunities are truly there in this role that I'm looking to do. And you would often find, and again, I don't think people are doing this for the wrong reasons. I think just people are so busy and they just, the demand is so great and that they just want to get this thing done and they want to get it done well. And they may fully believe that you are the person to come in and help do that, but they may also think you're the person to do this specific role, right? Like take SEC reporting for an example, right? Like I struggle with people looking at those opportunities. Again, not always, but if you want to be a lifer SEC reporting person, by all means, right? But oftentimes the upward mobility from that position can be a challenge. Not always, but so maybe I would say, if that's the position that's being offered to me, how about SEC reporting and technical accounting manager, right? Add a piece to that that does actually have clear mobility, or SEC reporting and assistant controller, right? Something like that, to where there's a direct connection to sort of a next step within the company where. And again, not to demean SEC reporting or SEC reporting roles. I had one and there was upward mobility there, but sometimes there's not. And I'm just picking that out of a hat. There could be several others, right? Like just making sure that there's a clear path to the next spot that you ultimately want to be.
I think that's the best advice that we can give our audience for this particular episode, Barrett, because we talked about earlier how the reason why you should look into IPO opportunities for your career is because of the ability to grow. So whether it's in the same function or maybe other ancillary functions in accounting, if you don't go into the interview asking what that roadmap may look like, then you might be just limiting yourself, in your example, just to SEC reporting. But if you go in and say, well, hey, I'm going to take this SEC reporting role, but maybe a SOX function or internal audit function opens up a year. If you can map that out with your potential employer, then that's going to get you excited and get you what you want from working at an IPO company.
Yep, exactly. Agree. 100%.
Well, so I also wanted to ask, because SPACs are newer, Barrett, and I know you have some experiences in that area as well. Like everything that we've talked about now, like is it different in a SPAC environment, or is it very similar to working at an IPO company?
They're very similar. Maybe the one distinction that I've noted is the teams. Everything that we said about IPOs is maybe times 1.5, right? Like the teams might even be a little bit smaller because this might have really come out of left field, right? If you're in one of the target companies for a SPAC, where at an IPO company, even if the company is sort of being secretive about it, typically, you can tell that the company is moving in a direction and that things are needed to be cleaned up. Where what I've seen in SPACs is sometimes the team has no idea and is just doing their thing as a private company, and this just literally lands on their plate. And all of these folks, in both IPO and SPAC, they already have full-time jobs, right? When somebody drops this transaction on their plate, on their desk, and they have to figure out a way to do it. So say, IPO company accounting department is lighter than the rest of the departments. A SPAC IPO accounting department, that's probably, 0.75, maybe 0.5 of what that is. So I would say the work is often more challenging. There's a belief that SPACs are faster. I don't think the data necessarily adds up or agrees with that. But unfortunately, optics are often, more important than reality. And so there's an even greater expectation or urgency to actually get these things done even quicker than they would get done in an IPO. So I would say, by and large, though, it's very similar. The process is similar, and the company still needs to, be ready to navigate the SEC process sooner rather than later. So more similarities than differences, but the subtle differences around just the expectations and the challenges.
Right. So similar in terms of just, if you want that accelerated learning experience, a SPAC is maybe in some ways even faster than your traditional IPO. So that's those are great points there, Barrett. And
look, I really enjoyed this. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate you inviting me on, and really a good time. And so thank you.
This is precious insight for our profession. And I know there are a lot of accountants looking to make similar moves from traditional industry to a pre-IPO environment. So this is really helpful. And I thank you, Barrett, for coming on today.
Right on. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for stopping by. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you want more information, please check us out at gapify.com, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.